Prepare for A Rood Awakening.
Shalom. This is Michael Rood at Ophel Gardens on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. We are living in God's universe. The world in which we live is synchronized to God's calendar and His time clock. The sun and moon are entwined in an intricate balance of natural law that is far more accurate than the cogs, gears, and springs in the finest Swiss watch. The passage of days, weeks, months, and years continue to be reckoned by the Almighty just as they have from the beginning. Whether we understand the Creator's reckoning of time or not does not alter His plans in the least. His reckoning of time is clearly detailed in the Hebrew Scriptures, but the Western world has completely forsaken God's reckoning of time and has adopted a pagan calendar in which every day of the week and every month of the year is named after a different pagan god or fallen angel. Days, weeks, months, and years all begin and end at completely fictitious points in time. It is as if the hands have been broken from the face of the clock. We have no idea what time it is, but the Creator knows, and He does not want His children to be ignorant of His times and His seasons. We are going back to Bereshit, back to the beginning, to Genesis, to rediscover God's reckoning of time. Isaiah the prophet said that Yahweh is great, far above all the mighty ones of the earth, telling the end from the very beginning, from Genesis. And from ancient times, He has declared the things that are not yet as though they have already transpired. He has already told us the end from the beginning in the times and seasons of the Lord. Join us in the Lester Summerall television studios where this multimedia presentation on the Prophecies and the Feast of the Lord was recorded before the Bible prophecy students assembled by the Prophecy Club. This is Bible Prophecy 101. Now, Episode 6 in the 26-part series on the Prophecies and the Feast of the Lord, we are living in God's universe. In Genesis 1:14 we go back, and God said, "Let them be for signs and for seasons, for days and for years." God's reckoning of time is governed by the movement of the heavenly bodies. And in order to understand God's reckoning of time, now we go to the biblical Hebrew calendar. And now this is not the modern Jewish calendar. The modern Jewish calendar is based on the astronomical calculations of Rabbi Hillel II in the 4th century. And even though those calculations were very accurate at the time, they were not accurate enough so that they would remain on track over the 1600 years that it has been in use. So most of the time we're celebrating the feast on the wrong day according to God's original reckoning of time. Now that we're back in the land, however, we can go back to God's original reckoning of time, and I personally believe that God runs the universe on His calendar, whether or not we understand or even recognize God's calendar. I believe that God's feast days will be fulfilled according to His prophetic calendar and not according to any of our own misunderstanding. And so it is this biblical Hebrew calendar that I'm going to begin to explain so that you understand how these charts work and to understand the calendar. And we see that in this biblical Hebrew calendar, right up at the top, we're going to take you to the beginning of the year. And first of all, to understand God's reckoning as it's laid out right in the book of Genesis, in the first chapter we see when days begin according to God's reckoning of time. Days begin when the sun sets, at sunset. Doesn't matter what time it is because every day it's different. It's different in Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. It's whenever the sun sets, that is when the day begins. When do weeks begin? Weeks begin at sunset at the end of the Sabbath. The Sabbath is Friday evening when the sun goes down until Saturday evening when the sun goes down. As the sun sets at the end of the Shabbat, at the end of Sabbath, that is the first day of the week. And that's why when we read in the book of the Acts of the Jewish Apostles, how that the disciples got together early on the first day of the week to break bread, that Shaul began teaching, and he taught late into the night until this young man fell out of the window. They ran out there, he was dead. They prayed for him, he was raised from the dead, and then everyone was so pumped up then, nobody could go to sleep all night long. And so when the sun came up, Shaul took off with his entourage and took off on their next journey, and everyone else went to work. See, in the Western Gentile Christian world, when people read early the first day of the week, they got together to break bread, they immediately think they got up real early on Sunday morning and had some kind of special brunch. Only in your Western Gentile mind, what they were doing was the third meal of Shabbat, the meal at the end of the Sabbath, in which after having a whole day of resting in the Sabbath, in studying the Scriptures, and being refueled by God, and eating of the bread of life, then at the end of the day, what we do is still this very day in the city of Jerusalem, then we leave our homes, we get together in larger groups around the table, everyone brings food. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Everyone brings food together, everyone eats together, and there everyone shares with each other. Everyone has a psalm, a hymn, a doctrine, a revelation. Look what the Lord showed me. And they minister to each other, and we drag that meal out until the wee hours of the morning sometimes. Nobody wants it to end. The Sabbath is such a blessing that God gave to us right in the very beginning. In Genesis, He set it apart, He sanctified it, He made it holy, and He said, keep it holy. And when that culture does this, in which everyone then participates and they get refueled and they read the Scripture, then when they get together, they've got something to share. They're not coming together as a bunch of needy basket cases in which you have to have a paid professional attempt to raise you from the dead 1 hour a week. There's no minister that gets paid enough to raise the dead 1 hour a week or is really that good at it, because everyone is supposed to minister to each other. And so we see in the first century believers getting together, that they got together, they broke bread, and they just shared late into the middle of the night until someone falls out the window and is taken up dead. I believe that's why windows were created, to keep kids from falling out late at the early the first day of the week in the middle of the night. So there it is, to where we have to have a perspective of the first century church, understanding these are Jews that are getting together like they have been for all these decades and doing the very same things. And we see that it's such a healthy thing that all the synagogues started in the home. The early believers all got together in the home. It was Constantine that started building cathedrals, setting theater style, and having a paid professional up front. So that's whenever the form does not allow the body of believers to function with everyone as a minister, then the form is wrong. Now this is a good form here tonight to disseminate a lot of information. But this is not how the assembly operates and ministers to each other. I can minister this way, but it has to be a sharing, a full sharing of everyone ministering to each other, everyone growing up in the fullness and stature of the Messiah. And that's what the goal is. Enough preaching, let's get back to the calendar. When do months begin, according to God's reckoning of time? Months begin when the first sliver of the new moon appears. And there is a mikra, or a rehearsal, that is done so that you know how that is established. But basically, when the first sliver of the new moon appears, that's the first day of the month. Then the moon waxes full about mid-month, then it wanes to where there is no moon, and then when the first sliver of the next new moon appears, that is the beginning of the month. And so we see that the lunar cycle, or the monthly cycle, is exactly 29.530587 days long, which means you either have a 29-day month or a 30-day month, one or the other, depending on the visible sighting of the first sliver of the new moon. Now, the next question would be, when do years begin? And to see when years begin, first of all, I would like you to look at the chart and to see the month of the Abib. As it is written in the King James, in the English version, it says the month of Abib. In Hebrew, it would be pronounced Aviv. And so you'll see that sometimes I write it Abib, sometimes I write it Aviv. After the Babylonian captivity, it was renamed as the month of Nisan. And the month of the Aviv is generally the first new moon after the vernal equinox, but that's not how it is determined. We're going to see that God's reckoning allows us to understand when the year begins and see that when we were in the land of Egypt, that is when God sent a plague of hail just before the Exodus. And it destroyed the barley because the barley was Aviv. But it didn't hurt some of the other crops. Now, whatever the word Aviv means, it is, first of all, it's referring to a level of maturity of the barley crop. And so it was in the month of the Aviv barley we came out of the land of Egypt. And that's why I said, this shall be the beginning of the year for you, the beginning of months, for in the month of the Aviv you came out of the land of Egypt. The month of the Aviv, in which the barley was Aviv, and the hail came down and destroyed the barley because it was Aviv. So we have those parameters that are set for the beginning of the year. Now, we know that when we came into the land of Israel, that we were required to go up to Jerusalem for the Feast of Unleavened Bread every year in the month of the Aviv. And so when we went up to the Feast of Passover, during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, we were then to harvest 10 omer of the new barley crop. So the barley has got to be harvestable. It has to be mature and harvestable during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And so we know that as early as 15 days earlier, that the barley must be Aviv. So whatever Aviv is, it means that as early as 15 days later, it's going to be harvestable. You may have to replay the tape a few times to get the full dynamics of what I'm talking about here, but I'll attempt to make it clear on this. Because whatever Aviv barley is, it means that 15 days later, it's going to be harvestable. That's the first month of the year. Now, we'll discuss that more in a little bit, but we see that the first month is called the month of the Aviv after the Babylonian captivity. It was also called Nisan. And that corresponds on the Gregorian, or as I affectionately call it, the pagan calendar, with the months of March and April. And then, of course, you have the second month, the month of Iyar, the third month, the month of Siwan. Now we come to the next month, the fourth month, and we have the month on the Jewish calendar, which is entitled the Month of Tammuz. Now, what is the month of Tammuz about? Where did that name come from?